My name is Margaret, and for 31 years I taught third grade at Lincoln Elementary School in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio. I taught penmanship and long division and the water cycle to nearly 900 children over the course of my career. And when I finally retired at 62, I thought I knew exactly what my life would look like. Mornings with coffee on the porch, afternoons in the garden, maybe a part-time job at the library just to stay busy. I had buried my husband. Frank 4 years earlier, a heart attack that took him far too fast, far too young, and I had built a quiet, steady life for myself in the aftermath. I wasn't lonely exactly, I was settled. Then my son Daniel called me on a Tuesday evening in March, and everything changed. Daniel is my only child. He's smart, he's kind at his core, and he married a woman named Vanessa 9 years ago. A sharp, ambitious marketing director who climbs corporate ladders the way other people climb stairs two at a time without looking down. They have two children, my grandson Ethan, who was 5 at the time, and my granddaughter Lily, who was only 2. I loved those children with a ferocity that surprised even me. I had thought I understood love as a grandmother before I held them. I did not. Daniel's voice on the phone that night had a nervousness to it I hadn't heard since he was a teenager asking to borrow the car. "Mom," he said, "Vanessa and I have been talking and we could really use your help. Daycare costs for both kids are eating us alive, and honestly, we'd rather have family raising them than strangers. Would you ever consider moving closer, or would you consider moving in with us?" I sat with that question for a long moment. On one hand, the offer terrified me a little. I had spent 4 years rebuilding an independent life after Frank died, learning to be alone without being lonely, and the thought of giving that up, of becoming in some sense a live-in employee in someone else's home, made something in my chest tighten. But on the other hand, there were my grandchildren, Ethan's gap-toothed smile, Lily's fat little hands reaching for me every time I visited. The thought of being there for their bedtime stories, their scraped knees, their first days of school, it pulled at something even deeper than my independence. "Let me think about it," I told Daniel. "And let me talk to Vanessa too. I want to make sure this is something she really wants, not just something you're asking on her behalf." When Vanessa got on the phone, she was warmer than I expected. She talked about how much she admired my patience with children, how the kids lit up every time I visited, how she trusted me more than any daycare in the state. She said the words, "We need you," 3 times in that conversation. I remember counting. What she didn't say "not yet" was what she actually meant by help. I would learn that distinction later the hard way. There was a practical piece to this decision too, one I want to be honest about, because it matters for everything that came after. Daniel and Vanessa had found a house, a lovely 4-bedroom colonial in a good school district with a finished basement that could be converted into a small in-law suite for me. It was a wonderful house, but it was also expensive, more than they could comfortably afford on their own, especially with Vanessa wanting to eventually cut back her hours once the kids were in school full-time. I had money. Frank and I had been careful savers our whole marriage, no fancy vacations, no new cars every few years, just steady work and steady saving. When he died, there was a life insurance payout on top of what we'd already put away. I didn't need all of it. I had my teacher's pension, modest but reliable, and a paid-off house of my own that I intended to sell. So when Daniel gently, almost apologetically mentioned that the down payment was going to be a stretch, I did something I didn't discuss with anyone outside the 3 of us. I offered to contribute half the down payment, a significant sum, more than $60,000, on the condition that my name go on the deed as a co-owner alongside Daniel's. Not out of distrust, not because I expected anything to go wrong. I did it because it was simply fair, and because at 63 years old, I had learned one lesson: above all others, verbal promises evaporate, but paperwork remains. Daniel agreed without hesitation. He loved the idea, actually. "It's your house too, Mom, obviously." And we sat at the closing table together that June, signing our names on line after line. Daniel Whitfield, Margaret Whitfield, equal owners, 50-50 in the eyes of the law. Vanessa wasn't at the closing. She was traveling for work that week, closing a big account, and she signed her portion of the paperwork separately, quickly, without much conversation about the specifics. I don't think she ever fully registered, or perhaps she simply forgot, the way busy people forget details that don't seem urgent, that her mother-in-law's name sat right there on the deed, carrying the same legal weight as her husband's. I didn't hide it, but I didn't announce it either. I have never been a woman who needs to remind people of what I've done for them. I believed in my heart that this was simply what family did for one another. You show up, you contribute what you can, and you trust that it will be recognized and respected in the ordinary give and take of shared life. I sold my own house that August, I packed 31 years of teaching memorabilia, 4 decades of marriage, and the entire remaining shape of my old life into moving boxes, and I drove 200 miles to a town I barely knew to live in the basement of my son's house to raise my grandchildren for the second time in my life. I told myself I was doing this out of love, and I was. But I want to be honest with you. Whoever is listening to this story, some small quiet part of me was also doing it because I was afraid of being alone for the rest of my life. And I thought this was a way to guarantee I never would be. I had no idea how alone a person can feel while living in someone else's house surrounded by family being useful every single day. That loneliness had a name waiting for it. I just didn't know it yet. The first few months in that house were in many ways exactly what I had hoped for. I woke Ethan for kindergarten every morning, made him oatmeal with cinnamon the way he liked it, and walked him to the bus stop at the end of the driveway holding his backpack strapped steady while he practiced skipping. I spent my days with Lily, who at 2 years old was a small tornado of curiosity, pulling books off shelves, demanding the same 3 songs on repeat, falling asleep in my arms during long afternoon walks around the neighborhood. In the evenings, when Daniel and Vanessa came home exhausted from their jobs, I had dinner ready, baths run, homework checked. I felt useful in a way I hadn't felt since my last classroom of third graders had filed out the door for summer break 8 years earlier. Daniel thanked me constantly in the beginning. He'd wrap me in a hug in the kitchen and say, "I don't know what we'd do without you, Mom." And I would feel something warm and whole settle into my chest. Vanessa was harder to read. She wasn't as a woman who moves through the world with a certain brisk efficiency. She doesn't linger over sentiment the way I do. In the early weeks, I told myself that was simply her personality, not a judgment on me. She'd come home, kiss the kids, ask me clipped questions about their day. Did Ethan eat lunch? Did Lily nap? And then disappear into her home office to answer emails until 9 or 10 at night. The first crack, if I'm honest with myself now, came in October, about 4 months after I'd moved in. I came home from a walk with Lily to find that my kitchen, the kitchen I cooked in every single day, the kitchen I had, in a very real sense, have paid for, had been completely reorganized. My spice rack, arranged alphabetically the way I'd always kept it, had been rearranged into some system I didn't recognize. My favorite mixing bowls had been moved to a high cabinet I couldn't reach without a step stool. A laminated card had been taped inside one of the cabinet doors, a kitchen system. Vanessa called it when I asked her about it that evening, with color-coded labels for kids' snacks, adult pantry, and grandma's section, as though I were a guest in a shared dormitory rather than a woman who had lived in and cooked in that kitchen every day for a third of a year. "I just think it runs more efficiently this way," Vanessa said, not unkindly, but not really asking either. "You know how I am about systems." I let it go. I told myself it was a small thing, that Vanessa's need for control over her environment was simply part of who she was, and that I was a guest in her domain even if my name was on the paperwork downstairs at the county recorder's office. I moved my spice rack back to alphabetical order when she wasn't home, quietly, the way you might correct a small rebellion no one needs to witness. Then in November came the schedule. Vanessa printed it out on a full sheet of paper and handed it to me over Sunday morning coffee, cheerful as anything, as though she were handing me a gift. It outlined hour by hour what she and Daniel expected of me during weekdays: wake times, meal prep times, laundry days assigned specifically to me, since you're home during the day anyway, pick up and drop off windows, even a designated hour for tidying common areas. I looked at that schedule for a long time. I want to be honest, there was nothing on it that was unreasonable in isolation. Helping with laundry, being available for pickups, keeping shared spaces tidy, these are things any grandmother helping raise children might naturally do, and I had been doing most of them anyway, gladly, without being asked. But something about seeing it typed out, formatted, handed to me like an employee handbook, made my stomach turn in a way I couldn't quite name yet. "This is helpful," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. "Thank you for putting this together." Vanessa smiled, satisfied, and went back to her coffee. That same month, I began noticing something else: small corrections delivered in front of the children about how I did things. I would cut Ethan's grapes into halves the way pediatricians recommend for young children, and Vanessa would say, "Actually, Margaret, we do quarters in this house. It's safer," in a tone that implied I, a woman who had raised a healthy child to adulthood and taught hundreds of other people's children for 3 decades, did not understand basic food safety. I would read Lily a bedtime story with different voices for different characters, the way I'd done with Daniel a lifetime ago. And Vanessa would appear in the doorway to say, "We're trying to keep bedtime calm and low stimulation. Margaret, maybe just read it straight." Each correction alone was nothing, a grain of sand. But grains of sand accumulate, and by December, I found myself second-guessing simple decisions I'd made instinctively my entire adult life: how to hold a baby, how to cut fruit, how to read a story, because I had absorbed, without quite realizing it, the message underneath the corrections that I was not a trusted equal in this household. I was staff. Beloved staff, perhaps. Useful staff, certainly. But staff. I mentioned it to Daniel once carefully over coffee while Vanessa was at work. I chose my words gently because I never wanted to put him in the position of choosing between his mother and his wife. I feel like Vanessa manages me sometimes, I said, instead of just living alongside me, if that makes sense. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture he'd had since he was a boy, one that always meant he was uncomfortable. She's just stressed, Mom. Work is intense right now. I think she doesn't always realize how things come across. I'll talk to her. He did talk to her, I believe. Things softened slightly for a week or two afterward. Then they drifted back to where they'd been, the way water finds its old channel again after a storm passes. I told myself that whole autumn and into the winter that I was simply here to help, that my job was to make my son's life easier and my grandchildren's childhood richer, and that my own feelings of being diminished were in the grand scheme of things a small price to pay. I had after all chosen this. I had signed on the dotted line quite literally. At the closing table in June, and there was a part of me that felt I had no right to complain about a situation I had walked into with my eyes open. What I did not yet understand was that helping and being erased are not the same thing, and that a woman can give everything she has to a family and still be introduced one day as though she were a stranger they'd hired off a website. That day was coming. It arrived in February at a dinner party wearing my good blue cardigan and a string of pearls Frank had given me for our 30th anniversary. Vanessa decided to host a dinner party in mid-February, what she called in the group text she sent to coordinate details, an important one. Daniel's company was in the midst of restructuring, and his new department head, a man named Richard Alderman, was going to be there, along with two of Vanessa's colleagues from the marketing firm where she was up for a promotion to senior director. It was in every sense a night designed to make an impression. I was at first genuinely excited to be included. Vanessa asked me 3 days beforehand if I would mind helping prepare some of the food. My beef bourguignon, a dish I'd perfected over decades, was a family favorite, and she wanted to serve something homemade and impressive rather than catered. I spent the better part of 2 days on that dish, browning the beef in batches the way Frank's French grandmother had taught me 40 years earlier, reducing the wine sauce slowly on the stovetop. The whole house filling with a rich, warm smell that made even Ethan wander into the kitchen asking when dinner would be ready. I dressed carefully that evening. I put on my good navy dress, and the blue cardigan styled my hair, wore the pearls Frank had given me. I felt for the first time in months like myself again, not staff, not a schedule item, but Margaret, a woman capable of holding her own in a room of accomplished people. I had, after all, spent 31 years managing classrooms of 25 children at a time, while their parents trusted me completely. I knew how to carry myself in a professional setting. The guests arrived around 6. I helped greet them at the door. Alongside Daniel, took coats, offered drinks, made the kind of easy small talk I'd made my entire adult life at school functions and church socials and Frank's old work parties. Richard Alderman, Daniel's new boss, seemed like a pleasant enough man in his 50s with an open, curious face. His wife Carol was warm too, asking me thoughtful questions about the house, about the neighborhood. Everything was going beautifully until the moment Vanessa gathered the room for a toast before dinner. She stood near the dining table, wineglass raised, guests arranged in a loose circle around her, and she began thanking everyone for coming, thanking Daniel for holding down the fort during a stressful quarter, thanking her own team for their hard work on the account she was hoping would secure her promotion, and then gesturing toward me with her glass still smiling, still perfectly pleasant. She said the words that I will remember for the rest of my life. And of course, a huge thank you to Margaret, who helps out around here. She's basically the nanny who keeps this whole household running. I genuinely don't know what we'd do without her. The nanny. I stood there in my navy dress and my pearls holding a serving spoon in my hand, and I felt the blood drain slowly from my face. I don't think anyone in the room noticed except perhaps Daniel, who I saw glance at me quickly and then look away, his jaw tightening, saying nothing. Carol Alderman, kind curious. Carol turned to me with genuine interest and asked, "Oh, how lovely. Do you live here full-time, or do you come in daily? What agency are you with?" "What agency are you with?" I opened my mouth, and for one of the only times in my adult life I found I did not have words ready. I had spent 31 years commanding a classroom, decades managing a household, and in that single moment standing in the dining room of a house I had paid $60,000 to help buy, I could not find a single sentence. I started and then stopped. Vanessa, oblivious, or perhaps simply moving quickly past an awkward moment of her own making, laughed lightly and said, "Oh, Margaret's too modest. She won't even tell you her rates. She's a saint, honestly." And then turned the conversation toward the appetizers, and the room moved on the way rooms do, the way conversations flow past the small cruelties inflicted on people who are too polite or too shocked to correct them in real time. I served the beef bourguignon. I refilled water glasses. I smiled at Richard Alderman's jokes about the Ohio State game. I helped clear plates and cut the dessert Vanessa had ordered from a bakery downtown, and cleaned the kitchen after the guests had gone standing alone at the sink at 11 o'clock at night, while Daniel and Vanessa said their goodbyes at the front door, laughing about how well the evening had gone. Nobody asked me if I'd had a good time. Nobody thanked me by name for the meal I'd spent 2 days preparing. I was for that entire evening exactly what Vanessa had introduced me as hired help, present but invisible, useful but unnamed in any way that mattered. I went down to my basement suite that night, sat on the edge of my bed, still wearing my pearls, and I cried quietly the way you cry when you don't want anyone upstairs to hear you, the way I hadn't cried since the week after Frank's funeral. I want to explain something to you if you're listening to this and you've ever felt what I felt that night. It wasn't really about the word nanny itself. Nannies are wonderful, hardworking women who deserve enormous respect for the difficult work they do. There is no shame in that title. What broke something in me was the erasure, the casual, almost thoughtless way my daughter-in-law had redefined me in front of strangers, in front of my own son as staff rather than family. As someone whose role in that house began and ended with usefulness. As someone with no name that mattered, no history that mattered, no ownership, legal or otherwise, that mattered. I thought about all of it that night. 31 years teaching other people's children. 34 years married to a good man. 4 years of learning to survive alone after he died. 8 months of giving up my own home, my own independence, my own kitchen, to help raise these 2 children I loved more than my own life. And in one sentence over a wine toast, I had been reduced to the nanny who helps out, not even given the dignity of an agency name. I did not sleep much that night, but somewhere around 3 in the morning, lying awake in the dark of that basement room, something in me shifted from grief into something quieter, colder, and far more useful. I remembered the paperwork sitting in the fireproof box in my closet, and I began very calmly to think about what I actually wanted to do next. I didn't confront anyone the next morning. I want to be clear about that because I think there's a version of this story where the wounded woman marches upstairs at 7 a.m. and demands an apology, and that is simply not who I am, and it is not what happened. What happened instead was quieter and in some ways more damning. The morning after the party Sunday, I got up early as I always did, made Ethan and Lily breakfast and moved through my normal routine with a strange hollowed-out calm. Daniel left early for a work call. Vanessa slept in until nearly 10, which was unusual for her, and when she finally came downstairs, she barely mentioned the party at all. No apology, no acknowledgement, nothing. Just a comment about how well the beef bourguignon had gone over, and a question about whether I could handle bath time that evening since she and Daniel had a couples thing to attend. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I was still in that moment operating on 31 years of professional habit. You show up, you do the job, you don't make a scene in front of the children. But that evening after Vanessa had left for her couples thing, I overheard something that changed everything. I was in the kitchen finishing dishes, and Vanessa's phone, which she'd left charging on the counter while she ran back upstairs for her coat, buzzed with an incoming call from her closest friend, a woman named Priya she'd known since college. Normally, I would never have paid attention to a phone call that wasn't mine, but Vanessa had left the ringer on speaker mode from an earlier call, a habit of hers, and when she came back downstairs and answered it while grabbing her purse, still standing in the kitchen not 10 feet from where I was drying a pot, I heard every word. "No, it's fine. Daniel's mom is here. She's basically our built-in nanny at this point," Vanessa said, laughing lightly into the phone. "Honestly, the best decision we ever made financially. I mean, can you imagine what daycare for 2 kids would cost us? And she does it basically for free. She just wants to feel useful. You know how older women get after their husbands die. They need a purpose." I stood very still at the sink. No, it's not forever." Vanessa continued moving toward the front hallway, her voice growing fainter but still audible. "Once Lily's in kindergarten full-time, I think we'll ease her out gently, obviously maybe suggest she get her own little apartment nearby or a senior community, something like that. I don't want us stuck taking care of an aging parent on top of everything else. That's a lot. We'll cross that bridge. For now, she's actually incredibly convenient. And the kids adore her, so win-win, really. Win-win. Ease her out. Built-in nanny. She just wants to feel useful." I heard the front door close. I heard Daniel's car start in the driveway. And I stood at that kitchen sink for a long time, the water running cold over my hands, replaying every word. Here is what I understood standing there in a way I had not fully let myself understand before. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not simply Vanessa's brisk personality or her stress from work or an unfortunate turn of phrase at a dinner party. This was a plan. A calculated financial practical plan in which I was a useful and temporary resource-free labor to be extracted for exactly as long as I was needed and then quietly relocated once my usefulness expired. Dressed up in language about my own well-being, about purpose and her own little apartment, as though setting me aside would somehow be a kindness done for my benefit rather than a convenience arranged for theirs. I want to tell you honestly what I felt in that moment, because I think it's important. I did not feel rage, not yet. I felt something colder and clearer than rage. I felt the specific quiet clarity that comes to a person who has spent her whole life being underestimated when she finally understands the full shape of what has been done to her. I dried my hands. I walked down to my room, and I opened the fireproof lockbox in the back of my closet where I kept Frank's old life insurance documents, our marriage certificate, and from the previous June, a manila folder holding the closing paperwork from the house. I hadn't looked at those papers since the day we signed them. I hadn't needed to. But I sat on the edge of my bed that night, reading through every page, slowly, methodically, the way I used to grade essays, checking every line, every signature, every notarized stamp. It was all exactly as I remembered. The deed. Warranty deed, Franklin County, State of Ohio. Grantees Daniel R. Whitfield and Margaret A. Whitfield as tenants in common, each holding an undivided 50% interest. My name in black ink, carrying precisely the same legal weight as my son's. Not a loan, not a gift with strings attached, an ownership interest permanent and enforceable. In the very house where I had just been called basically a nanny, who would eventually be eased out once she'd outlived her usefulness. I sat with that folder in my lap for a long time. And slowly, methodically, the way I used to plan a lesson before a difficult unit, I began to think through what I actually wanted. I did not want revenge exactly. I want to be honest about that because I think revenge as a goal curdles a person, and I did not want to become someone smaller and meaner than I already was. What I wanted was truth. I wanted the truth of my situation, my ownership, my contribution, my humanity to be spoken plainly in that house, once clearly in a way that could never again be waved away with a joke about not knowing her rates. I decided I would not raise my voice. I would not cry, not in front of them. I would not threaten anything I wasn't prepared to follow through on. I would simply gather the facts, gather my composure, and gather my family, and I would tell them exactly where things stood legally, financially, and emotionally, and let them sit with the truth of what they had built on top of my quiet generosity. The next morning I made one phone call, not to Daniel, not to Vanessa. I called an old friend of Frank's, a man named Robert Kessler, who had been our family's attorney for almost 25 years and had personally handled the closing on the house the previous June. I asked him calmly to confirm exactly what my rights were as a co-owner and what my options would be if I ever wanted to formalize a change to the household, whether that meant requiring a buyout, forcing a sale, or simply asserting terms of my own continued residence. Robert, God bless him, didn't ask many questions. He simply said, "Margaret, you own half that house free and clear, same as if you'd bought it entirely on your own with a partner. Nobody can ask you to leave. Nobody can sell it without your signature. Nobody can treat you as anything less than an equal owner in the eyes of the law, whatever they may believe in their own kitchen." I thanked him. I hung up the phone, and I began to plan the conversation I would have with my son and his wife that Friday evening once the children were asleep. I chose Friday deliberately. Fridays Daniel didn't have early meetings the next morning, and Vanessa usually allowed herself one glass of wine and an unhurried evening, which meant she'd be present, relaxed, and I hoped willing to actually listen rather than rushing off to the next obligation. I put the children to bed myself that night, reading Lily her 3 songs, tucking Ethan in with his usual request for the hallway light to stay on. I kissed them both the way I always did, and I felt walking down that hallway afterward a strange combination of sorrow and steadiness, sorrow that it might come to this steadiness in knowing that it needed to. I found Daniel and Vanessa in the living room. Daniel scrolling his phone on the couch, Vanessa curled up with a glass of white wine, some home renovation show playing quietly on the television. I asked if I could speak with them both for a few minutes, and something in my tone, steady, formal, entirely unlike my usual soft requests, made Vanessa mute the television without being asked twice. I sat down across from them, not beside them, deliberately. I had thought carefully about what I wanted to say, and I had written a few key phrases down on an index card tucked in my cardigan pocket, though, in the end, I barely needed to look at it. "I want to talk about the dinner party 2 weeks ago," I began, "specifically about being introduced as the nanny." Vanessa's face shifted immediately into something defensive, already halfway to an apology that wasn't quite an apology. "Margaret, I'm sorry if that came across wrong. I was just trying to—" "Please let me finish," I said gently but firmly, in the exact tone I used to use with a classroom of 8-year-olds who needed to understand that the adult in the room was for the moment going to be the one speaking. "I'm not here to relitigate one sentence at a party. I'm here because that sentence was not an accident. It was the truest expression of something I have come to understand you actually believe about my place in this family. I told them calmly about overhearing the phone call with Priya. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I simply repeated word for word as best I could remember them the phrases Vanessa had used built-in nanny basically for free, ease her out to her own little apartment, win-win. Vanessa's face went white, then red. I didn't mean it like, I think you meant it exactly like that, I said still gently. And I want to be honest with you both about something because I think it's long past time. When Daniel called me last March and asked if I would move in to help with the children, I said yes, because I love Ethan and Lily more than I can put into words and because I believed foolishly perhaps that this family operated on mutual respect and honesty. I paused and then I said the words I had been building toward for 2 weeks. What neither of you seem to fully remember or perhaps never fully registered is that I did not move into this house as a guest or as free labor or as a temporary convenience to be eased out once it's no longer useful to you. I own half of this house. My name is on the deed alongside Daniel's as an equal owner in exchange for the $62,000 I contributed to the down payment last June. Not a loan, not a favor. An ownership interest permanent and legally binding. Confirmed just this week by Robert Kessler, the same attorney who handled our closing. The silence in that room was the kind of silence I imagine happens in courtrooms right after a verdict is read. Daniel's face had gone through several stages of understanding while I spoke confusion, then dawning horror, then something that looked almost like shame. He knew, of course, technically that my name was on the deed. But I don't think he had ever truly sat with what that meant, had never connected it in any real way to how his wife spoke about me when she thought no one was listening. Mom, I didn't know he started. I know you didn't know, Daniel, I said. And that's part of the problem too. But tonight isn't about assigning blame between the two of you. Tonight is about the fact that I have given this family everything I have to give for the past 8 months, my time, my labor, my savings, my independence, and I have been repaid with a joke about my hourly rate at a dinner party and a private plan to relocate me to my own little apartment the moment I stop being convenient. I looked directly at Vanessa. I am not a nanny, Vanessa. I am not staff. I am not a resource to be extracted and discarded. I am this family's matriarch, and as of last June, I am also quite literally this family's landlord in every sense that matters legally. I would like going forward for both of those facts to be treated with the respect they deserve. Vanessa, to her credit, and I want to be fair in telling this story, did not immediately become defensive or angry. She sat very still, her wineglass forgotten on the side table, and something in her posture crumpled slowly like a building whose foundation has just been pointed out to be cracked. I need to think about some things clearly out loud, so there's no confusion later, I continued. First, I am not leaving this house now or in the foreseeable future unless I choose to. That is not a threat. That is simply a fact supported by law. Second, if I am going to continue contributing my time and labor to this household, and I love those children with my whole heart, it will be as a respected member of this family, not an employee working off an unspoken schedule taped inside a kitchen cabinet. Third, and this is the part I most need you both to hear, if this dynamic does not change, I'm prepared to explore my legal options regarding my ownership share, up to and including requiring a formal buyout of my interest or forcing a sale of the property so that I might use those funds to build an independent life elsewhere on my own terms, surrounded by people who see me as more than convenient help. I let that sit in the room for a moment. I would very much prefer not to do that, I added. And here for the first time all evening, my voice softened. I love this family. I love this house, this life, these children more than I have loved almost anything in my entire life outside of my marriage. I don't want to leave. I want to stay and be loved and be respected in equal measure. But I need you both to understand that I will not stay here as someone's unpaid disposable help. That is not who I raised my son to become. And it is not who I intend to spend the remainder of my life pretending to be. Vanessa was crying by the time I finished, quiet, genuine tears, not the performative kind. Margaret, I am so sorry, she said, and her voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard before, not brisk, not managed, just raw. I think I got so used to thinking of you as help because it was easier than thinking about what we actually owe you. It's easier to think of someone as the nanny than to sit with how much you've given up for us. I'm ashamed of what you heard on that call. I'm ashamed of the party. I don't have an excuse. Daniel reached over and took my hand, something he hadn't done since he was a much younger man. Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have said something the moment I saw your face at that party. I saw it and I said nothing, and that's on me just as much as anything Vanessa said. I did not forgive everything in that single conversation. Trust once broken is not repaired in a single evening, no matter how sincere the apology. But I felt for the first time in months that I had been heard, not managed, not scheduled, not corrected in front of the children, but genuinely, fully heard. The weeks that followed were not perfect. I want to be honest about that too, because I think stories that wrap up too neatly do a disservice to anyone actually living through something like this. There were awkward moments. Vanessa adjusting to a new way of relating to me, occasionally overcorrected, asking my opinion on things almost too deferentially, as though she were walking on eggshells rather than simply treating me as an equal. Daniel and I had 2 more long conversations that spring, working through years of unspoken dynamics that went back further than just the past 8 months. Nothing about family repair happens in a single dramatic scene, no matter how satisfying that scene might feel in the moment. But real changes did happen and they mattered. The laminated kitchen schedule came down within the week. Vanessa asked me genuinely how I preferred to organize the spice rack and then left it exactly as I'd always kept it. The kitchen system card in the cabinet disappeared, replaced by nothing at all, because a kitchen shared by equals doesn't need a label explaining whose section is whose. More importantly, the language changed. At a small family gathering that April, just us, no dinner party, performances for outside guests, Vanessa's sister came to visit, and when she asked casually who I was, Vanessa didn't hesitate. "This is Daniel's mother, Margaret," she said. "She lives with us. This is actually her house every bit as much as ours. She's family. We'd be lost without her. She's family. Not the nanny, not help, family." I want to tell you about one particular afternoon near the end of that April because I think it captures something important about how all of this resolved. I was in the backyard garden, a small plot near the fence that Vanessa had months earlier suggested I could plant if I wanted something to do. I had taken that suggestion at the time as one more small diminishment, one more polite way of giving the older woman a hobby to occupy her hours. But I'd planted tomatoes and zinnias there anyway, because I genuinely loved gardening, and by that April, the early spring plantings were just beginning to show green shoots against the dark soil. Ethan, now 6, was crouched next to me, carefully patting soil around a tomato seedling with his small hands, asking me 100 questions about how plants know which way is up. Lily, almost 3 now, sat in the grass nearby, methodically pulling petals off a dandelion with the fierce concentration only a toddler can bring to a task with no purpose at all. Vanessa came out onto the back porch with 2 glasses of iced tea, walked over and handed me one, not because it was on any schedule, not because it was assigned to any role, but simply because she'd made a picture and thought I might like some. She sat down on the grass beside me in her work clothes, which she rarely did given how careful she usually was about keeping things clean and orderly. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she told me, watching Ethan pat down soil with the intense focus of a small scientist. "About being eased out once I didn't need you anymore. I think about that phrase more than almost anything else I've ever said in my life, and I hate that I said it. I hate that it was true, even for a moment in my head." "It's all right," I said, and I meant it mostly. "It's not really," she said. "But I'm grateful you told me the truth instead of just quietly resenting me for years or leaving without explanation. I don't think I would have understood any other way. I needed to hear exactly how it sounded out loud from someone I actually respect." We sat there for a while in silence, watching the children drinking iced tea, the late afternoon sun slanting warm across the yard. I thought in that moment about everything that had led to this quiet, ordinary afternoon: 31 years of teaching, 34 years of marriage, 4 years of learning to be alone, 8 months of being erased and diminished, and one Friday evening where I had finally calmly insisted on being seen. I want to say something directly to you if you are a woman listening to this story who has ever felt what I felt at that dinner party, reduced, dismissed, treated as useful but unworthy of real respect in your own family and a life you helped build with your own hands and your own money and your own years. You are allowed to name what is happening to you. You are allowed to gather the facts, legal, financial, emotional, and lay them plainly on the table without shouting, without apologizing for taking up space in your own life. Being kind and being a doormat are not the same thing, and it took me 63 years and one terrible night in a navy dress and pearls to finally understand the difference. I still live in that house. I still make Ethan's oatmeal with cinnamon every morning. I still read Lily her 3 songs every single night. But I am no longer the nanny who helps out. I am Margaret. I am family. And I am in every sense that the law and my own heart recognize exactly half the reason that house exists at all. That is enough. That was always enough. It simply took someone finally saying so out loud for everyone in that house, myself included, to actually believe it.